Why the hell does this exist? So a year before the EU was declared non-canon, instead of trying to wrap it up before it was decanonized and leaving everything except the Old Republic on a cliffhanger, they decided to publish a satirical, non-canon kids book instead of something important. Published in 2013 by Scholastic and written by Jeffrey Brown, who you might recall wrote a short story in the book From a Certain Point of View, wrote a book called Star Wars Jedi Academy. Not to be confused with the video game with a similar name, is a non-canon kids book about a kid named Roan Novachez who aspires to be a pilot but gets rejected from Flight Academy and gets accepted at random by the Jedi Academy on Coruscant. I was around 11 when this book came out, and since I wasn't wise enough to realize this was a non-canon kids book, this book really confused me since it was a story that contradicted the films. Of course, it was just a satirical kid story, but I didn't know that at the time, so while the book was a fun read, it made no sense because I didn't realize it wasn't canon. For some reason, whoever was responsible didn't slap the affinities label on this story. One thing I realized while reading it is that it had an uncanny resemblance to Diary of a Wimpy Kid in terms of structure. It's literally Diary of a Wimpy Kid in Star Wars. I mean, a Diary of a Wimpy Kid story could have worked in Star Wars if it was the journal of Anakin Skywalker at the temple during the span between The Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones, because from what we know from Legends, his time at the Jedi Temple was depressing to say the least. But we're not talking about Anakin. We're talking about this Roan guy. So without further ado, let's begin the story. The book is structured exactly like Diary of a Wimpy Kid with our protagonist, structuring everything like a journal. Told you it was a clone of that series. Anyways, Roan starts off with a title crawl talking about himself and his desires to become a pilot. Roan in his story lives on Tatooine with his mother and his little brother. He has an older brother and a dad already trained pilots. One thing I don't get was the choice to make Tatooine his home planet. It's an outer rim planet controlled by the Hutts with no ties to the Republic. I'll get to this later. Basically, he's a normal kid waiting to be accepted into Pilot Academy that exists on Tatooine somehow, but after a while of waiting, he gets rejected, and there's a failed cliche joke about being accepted into the Agricultural Academy, where you are trained to plant stuff. Roan spends the next 2 pages complaining about how his life is over, despite his mother trying to cheer him up. We get a comic strip of Roan trying to plant something, and then the page after that, Roan gets the most unexpected letter ever. The Jedi Academy on Coruscant, ran by a guy called Principal Ma, says that his rejection to Flight Academy was overheard by Master Yoda, who decided to invite him to the Jedi Academy on Coruscant. This book never explains how a kid in Hutt space came to the attention of the Jedi Order, or how Yoda knew Roan was Force sensitive. It reminds me of the bullshit of how Rian Johnson thought that anyone could be a Jedi, regardless of bloodline. And anything that reminds me of that piece of shit gets negative points. The book also never explains why Roan was accepted into Jedi Academy in his middle school years, which the book actually addresses, mind you, where it says that they only accept toddlers into the academy. Whatever, so we get an overview of all the teachers, one of which isn't a Jedi. A Wookiee named Kit Mum who teaches physical education. There's also an FAQ on the previous page with the most basic answers. What is a Jedi? A Jedi is a diplomat warrior who fights for peace and justice in the galaxy. What tools do the Jedi use? The Jedi uses a lightsaber, a kind of sword made with a blade made of pure energy, and the Force. Shit like that. So anyways, we get a brochure about the Jedi Academy, which I don't understand because the book establishes that most attendees start off as toddlers who can't read, and that Roan was an exception. I'm thinking too deep about it, but that's what happens when you grow up. You think about things more. The page after that is your cliche good luck message from Roan's dad. Anyways, after a goodbye with his mother, Roan is off to Coruscant. When Roan gets there, he meets a guy named Pasha and a guy named Bill. The book quickly establishes who Roan's allies are, but they also establish his enemies, when the mean kids bump into him and grow jealous of him because he was accepted into the academy late, since they've been trained from birth. The story should have naturally developed the rivalry. You could have done what Harry Potter did, but I guess I'm just nitpicking. Next page, 2 girls. Tegan and Gianna introduce themselves. I'm already jealous because I never would have gotten this much attention at that age. Anyways, after a final introduction to Egon, they go to their dorms and Rowan is shocked when his new friends use the Force to lift their bags and shit. After that, Rowan meets Yoda, who confuses him with his backwards talking. He writes his disappointment at meeting Master Yoda. He expected a gruff and tough man with dual swords and a battle scar. And just like some of the audience would have been in 1980, Rowan is disappointed on how Yoda turns out to be. Rowan says, and I quote, "I can't understand what he says half the time. He is 700 years old. Maybe he was easier to understand 200 years ago? Wait. Yoda was 880 during the prequel era. When is this book set? 196 years before the Battle of Yavin? You mean it's basically a High Republic novel before the High Republic was established to even be a thing? Wow, legends beat him to it." Wikipedia confirms this story takes place 196 years before the Battle of Yavin. Guess that explains why Yoda is the only character I recognize. Reading this book for the first time, I was wondering where the hell Mace Windu and Ki-Adi-Mundi and all those other Jedi were. This book doesn't have the most direct story. It's basically Rowan making it through the school year. There's no overarching story I can name besides Rowan trying to get through middle school, or in this case, Jedi Academy. There's a lot of attempts at comedy, but a lot of them fall flat. For example, on his first day of school, he arrives late because his watch was set to Tatooine time. Shit like that. A lot of this early book is Rowan complaining about Jedi Academy. Rowan also meets Mr. Garfield, the most least sounding appropriate name for a Star Wars character ever. Whose idea was it to give a Jedi that name? Mr. Garfield throughout the course of the book is the Snape wannabe, inspired by the character in fact. He's grumpy all the time, but we don't get to see where that comes from. At least in this book. Maybe it's in the sequels, but who knows. Another teacher is Kitnum, as mentioned before, a female Wookiee who is basically the PE teacher. Rowan says he can't understand the teacher, which makes it baffling why a Wookiee was made a teacher on anywhere other than Kashyyyk. I get it's a joke, but come on. Star Wars is known to tell a more intelligent story despite being aimed at kids. I'm just nitpicking here, but this book just made me cringe at the juvenile humor it threw at me. This book has not aged well as it could have for me. Sometimes there's pages that are well illustrated, but they don't play any important role in the story other than stuff we already knew. Rowan asks for a place to sit near the bullies, and they tell him to sit on the floor and laugh. Yeah, we get it, Jeffrey Brown. The bullies are dicks. These bullies are so stereotypical and cliche. It's hard to make a bully character original anyways. This book is actually kind of boring at times because there's just a bunch of filler. Like this quiz that Rowan almost gets correct. Rowan also keeps track of what Yoda says too. Sometimes the book is just cliche joke after another. It was hard for me to seamlessly keep track of the book. It just couldn't keep my attention half the time. I really don't know what to say about the book that I haven't already said. Skipping through a bunch of pages, we have the trip to Kashyyyk, but the thing that doesn't make sense about it is that we go to the very bottom ground, aka the Shadowlands, which is just a terrible idea, especially since Yoda talks about wild animals like the Catan and the spider from Fallen Order. Also, his friend Kashyyyk goes missing, and they find him by navigating the sun or something. I don't remember. Then we have the cliche urban legend forest thing around the campfire. Fuck it, this book has no straightforward plot. It's just random activities, so let's just get through it all. Mr. Garfield's class has his students test their lightsabers, and the Goat Kid's lightsaber malfunctions. Predictable, the Goat Kid was established to be nervous. Rowan also establishes a comic he can draw to the gal who handles the newspapers, called Ewok Pilot. Predictable. Then there's the shit about the science fair project, as Rowan tries to make a replica of the Mustafarian volcanoes, but it explodes. Seriously? Will this book stop shoving cliches in my face? I'm quite sick of it. After complaining about the Force, we are properly introduced to Ronald Reagan, a kid with the same haircut as the president of the same name. This kid basically aspires to be a galactic senator. These characters have blatantly obvious character traits. So there's a subplot of Rowan making posters for both Bill and Ronald, who are running against each other. You know, I wouldn't be surprised if the same people made the election advertisements for both Biden and Trump to make a quick buck. Then there's the stupid school dance thing. Now this is a reason why a kid watching the prequels will get confused. Jedi do not show attachment. So having a party where there's going to be a lot of drinking, dancing, and fights is not a good idea. Besides, they probably put on some really tame music, like the Gungan City music, and not something like Battle of the Heroes. But anyways, Roan gets his report card. Mostly impressive, except for a D assigned by Yoda. And then to pad the book out, since there isn't really an overarching plot, Roan returns to Tatooine, and we're just halfway through the book. Oh boy, not much happens on Roan's summer break. It's just shit designed to waste your fucking time. When he gets back, the only really important thing in the second half is Roan qualifying for a lightsaber fencing competition, where during a fight, Cyrus and Pasha are dueling each other, and Roan turns Cyrus's lightsaber off with the Force, ending with Cyrus winning by disqualification on Pasha's part. And then there's Roan using the Force and him getting good grades. And then they wrap up the book with Roan realizing next year they can do starfighter training. So he gets what he wants regardless, even if he had to wait a year. And that's the book. This story, as mentioned before, has no overarching plot, aside from Roan attending Jedi Academy. I would have liked something more interesting to be going on. This is Star Wars. I would have liked more than a middle school experience. Looking at Legends for inspiration, there was this one story about Count Dooku's friend stealing and opening a Sith holocron from the archives. Something like that is far more interesting than this. Since I live in Australia, we don't have middle school. It's usually primary school, then high school, or secondary school. There is no middle school, so I'm not sure how I can relate to this book. I think your late primary and early secondary years are meant to represent middle school maybe, but since I don't know, I couldn't relate to this book. A lot of stuff is exaggerated. I personally would have liked a less satirical story, and a story more akin to the prequels. Maybe a substitute for Anakin's years at the Jedi Temple. Like, let's set this story around the High Republic era as it is, and have Roan Novichez like Anakin. Be accepted into the Jedi Academy for whatever reason at his age. Maybe he was supposed to join at birth, but his parents hid him to protect him, and now his parents have been arrested by the Republic and sent to prison, which is a law-friendly story, because the Jedi usually had legal rights over Force-sensitive children, being baby snatchers and all. There, Roan grows up with worldviews and will be uncomfortable with being in the Jedi Order. This kind of story would be far more interesting than a satirized Jedi middle school. Star Wars can be far more outlandish than that. There are many stories from Star Wars Legends that are just balls to the walls insane. Maybe you can have Roan in his story make friends and grow attachments, basically make him a second Anakin Skywalker. Maybe it all ends with him embracing the dark side to escape his life at the Jedi Order. That is a more interesting idea than what was given in the story. The reason I'm so angry at this story is that it's a fucking waste. Considering that Legends was near the point of being discontinued, and instead of wrapping it up, they instead to do a satirical story, aka this story. But let me say that this story is far more impressive than the High Republic bullshit, especially since it is set around the same time, and it didn't even have to be canon in any way to do that. That being said, it was interesting checking out this book for the first time in years. Maybe I'll do the sequels, which will be new territory for me because I've only read this book in the Jedi Academy series. But my main complaint is that it just doesn't hold up as well as it could have. I'm JJ Plagiarisms, and until next time, what are stories about mystery boxes?
Water was running, children were running, you were running out of time. Under the mountain, a golden fountain, were you praying at the